"You're being evicted. The HOA has voted unanimously." Those were the words Sharon Blake, the president of our local HOA, flung at me as she stood in front of my ranch gate with a smug grin. I had only stepped out to check on my chickens and saw her golf cart parked partly on my gravel driveway. Behind her, 2 other HOA board members stood like guards, holding up a notice as if it were some sort of royal proclamation. I glanced at the paper. Big, bold red letters declared, "Notice of termination of tenancy at 30 days to vacate." My hands shook, but not from fear. I was angry. This wasn't just a house, this was my family's land. My father used to raise cattle here. My mother grew tomatoes out back until the day she died. My kids took their first steps on this soil, and now these HOA newcomers who had only moved in 3 years ago with their fancy electric cars and manicured lawns thought they could just kick me out? I folded the notice and looked at Sharon. "Big mistake," I said in a low voice. She sneered like she thought I was nothing more than a joke. "You've got 30 days, cowboy. Better start packing." But what Sharon didn't know was that I wasn't just some guy who lived at the edge of town. I owned the very lot where the HOA's clubhouse was built. And their lease, it was up for renewal in just 2 weeks. I walked into that HOA meeting, dropped the new lease agreement on the table, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "The new rent is triple, and I'm reclaiming the HOA's main parking lot. You'll need to find another spot in maybe Sharon's driveway." Gasps echoed around the room. Sharon's face drained of color. But that was only the beginning. "My name is Matthew Collier. Most folks around here just call me Matt. I'm 52, a widower, and a 4th-generation rancher. I live in Willow Creek, Texas, a small town with a big heart. The kind of place where neighbors bring you a pie just because it's Tuesday and everyone knows who owns what. I never wanted any drama. I just wanted some peace, room to raise my chickens, and fresh air to breathe. But that changed the day the Willow Creek Estates HOA decided they wanted to clean up the neighborhood. Let me rewind a bit. It all started 6 months before that eviction notice. That's when Sharon Blake first paid me a visit, flashing that fake smile of hers. She wore a pastel pink suit way too fancy for a stroll across a field and was doused in perfume. She smiled as she held up a clipboard. "Hi there, Mr. Cole. Just wanted to chat about your fencing. It's, well, rustic." I laughed. "That's a polite way of saying it's sold." She nodded, unbothered. "It doesn't match the community's guidelines. We'd appreciate it if you replaced it with something more modern, maybe white vinyl and nice, neat, safe." I leaned on the gate and squinted at her. "This isn't a gated community, it's a ranch. That fence has been here longer than you've been alive." Her smile faltered just a bit. "We're trying to raise property values, Mr. Cole." I shook my head. "Then maybe stop building yoga platforms next to my cattle barn." We both chuckled, but only mine was genuine. That was the first strike. Then came the letters, dozens of them. Complaints about my rooster crowing too early, the smell of manure drifting too close to the HOA pool, my old truck making too much noise when I came back from the farmer's market. One time, they even complained that my scarecrow looked too intimidating to children. I didn't even know how to reply to that one. Still, I kept to myself. I figured they'd get tired of it eventually. But then Sharon started showing up more often, always with 2 board members in tow, Tom and Julie, both in their mid-40s, both dressed like they were about to sell overpriced insurance. They walked around my land like they owned it, pointing at things, whispering, and scribbling notes. Then one day, I noticed spray-painted lines across the west side of my ranch right through my sunflower field. I called the county to find out what was going on. Turns out, the HOA had submitted a plan to build a community walking trail through my land. That was the last straw. I drove straight to the county office and got the full map. That's when I realized something that changed everything. The Willow Creek HOA had no idea. They didn't actually own the land their office and clubhouse were on. My grandfather had leased it to them decades ago on a quiet 10-year renewable contract. That contract was set to expire in 60 days. They'd never paid attention to it, never read the fine print. They just assumed the land came with the job. That's when everything shifted. I didn't say a word to Sharon. Instead, I went to see my lawyer, Miss Eloise, a sharp old lady who's been handling my family's land deals for as long as I can remember. Together, we rewrote the lease agreement. We tripled the rent, added strict parking rules, and a just for Funa included a clause that let me turn the parking lot into farmland if the rent was late. Then I waited. Back to that home meeting. Sharon was in her usual spot at the head of the table, flipping through her agenda, all smiles. I walked in without knocking. "Matt," she said, clearly annoyed, "this meeting is for board members only." I dropped the new lease on the table. "Then you'll want to read this very carefully." She flipped the first page. Her eyes scanned the document. Her face went pale. Tom leaned over her shoulder. "This can't be right." "Oh, it's right," I said calmly. "I own the land under this building. Your lease expires in 2 weeks. So either you sign the new agreement and pay the new rent, or you move your hoe somewhere else." Sharon's mouth opened, then closed. Julie leaned in, whispering, "This is extortion." I chuckled. "No, this is Texas real estate." And just like that, the whole room fell silent. Things really started to unravel for them when I dropped my final bombshell. "I'm also taking over the parking lot starting Monday. It's off limits unless you have a permit, and the only permit comes from me." The room erupted. People were shouting, papers were rustling, and Sharon was trying to restore order while sweat stained her pink suit. That's when one of the elderly residents, Mr. Bill from Lot 8, stood up and said something I'll never forget. "About time someone put you all in check." That evening, I sat out on my porch, a cold glass of sweet tea in hand, watching the sun dip behind the barn. I knew Sharon wasn't going to let this slide, but I didn't expect what came next. 2 nights later, I woke up to the glare of headlights outside. A group of men in reflective vests was unloading construction cones at the entrance to my property. They hammered a wooden sign into the ground. I grabbed my flashlight and strode out to see what the hell was going on. The sign read, "HOA property no entry. Trespassers will be reported." Oh, it was on now. My flashlight beam locked on those absurd words, each letter feeling like a personal insult. They'd driven it right into the entrance of my ranch, like they actually owned the place, like they had some legal claim. I walked up slowly. 4 men in orange vests were there, one of them sipping coffee like it was just another job. "Hey," I barked. They froze in place. "Who sent you?" I demanded, sweeping the light across their faces. One of them stepped forward nervously. "We're just contractors, sir. Got an email from Sharon Blake with the hoe. She said this lot was part of the community expansion. It told us to put up signs and prep for fencing." "Fencing?" I echoed, like I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yeah, you have broken bar temporary barriers." She said it's for hoe storage, maybe garden renovations. I took a deep breath and lowered the flashlight. "Do you boys have a permit for any of this?" They exchanged glances. I knew the answer. I pulled out my phone and called Sheriff Talley, a no-nonsense guy with a deep southern drawl and a reputation for settling things with just one look. We'd gone to high school together. When he picked up, I said, "Dale, Sharon Blake's trying to take over my land in the middle of the night." 20 minutes later, he showed up with flashing lights and 2 deputies in tow. He also brought a clipboard full of county zoning records. After 10 minutes of checking the land records and grilling the contractors, Dale came over to me and shook his head. "They've got nothing." "And this sign?" He yanked it out of the ground with one hand and tossed it aside. "Illegal." The contractors packed up and left without another word. But Dale wasn't finished. "You'd better be ready, Matt. Sharon's digging in deep. She filed a zoning complaint with the town council this morning. Claims your ranch doesn't meet the neighborhood uniformity laws. She's trying to build a case to wipe your property off the association's map." "She can try," I muttered. "She will," he said. "And she'll twist every rule she can." The next few days felt like walking barefoot on broken glass. Every morning, I'd find something new, a citation taped to my barn, a warning stuck to my front door, a drone buzzing over my chicken coop. I started to feel like a prisoner on my own land. The neighbors, they were split. Folks like Mr. Bill from Lot 8 and the Hernandez couple from Lot 12 stood by me, good people who remembered when Willow Creek was about community, not committees. But others, a broken bar, they started whispering, "Matt's stirring up trouble. He's too stubborn. He's making life harder for everyone." I saw the sideways glances at the local diner, the tight-lipped smiles. Even Sandy, the waitress, started handing me my coffee without her usual smile. Still, I kept my head high. I had a plan. While Sharon was busy playing political games, I was gathering my own ammunition of documents, history, and allies. I met with Miss Eloise again. I need the full title history of this land, I told her. Every lease, every boundary marker, every right-of-way this hoe has touched since they got here. She didn't even glance up from her paperwork. Already on it, darling. Got a 92-page packet in my trunk. Let's bury them in the truth. And we would have done just that, a broken bar, if it hadn't been for what happened next. It was a Wednesday morning. I woke up early, pulled on my boots, and headed out to feed the chickens. I'd barely stepped off my porch when I heard tires crunching on the gravel. A red SUV came flying down the road way too fast for a neighborhood street and skidded to a stop at my gate. Sharon jumped out, followed by Tom and a man in a sharp gray suit with a briefcase. Matthew Cole, she shouted. Sharon stormed straight at me, not waiting for a word. You're in violation of HOA Code 15.2, she snapped. We've served you notices, filed with the town, and now you're being sued for non-compliance and community disruption. The man in the suit opened his briefcase and handed me a thick stack of papers. Cease and desist, he said flatly. Immediate removal of all livestock, unauthorized fencing, and get these non-decorative farming equipment visible from the street. I raised an eyebrow. You mean my tractor? He nodded, like he was handing down a death sentence. I flipped through the papers. Illegal threats, demands, and even a court date set 2 weeks away. Sharon folded her arms and smirked. This is the end of your little cowboy act, Matt. I took a step closer and looked her dead in the eye. You just picked the wrong fight. But inside, my stomach churned. This was bigger than I'd realized. They weren't just trying to push me out, they wanted to erase everything I stood for. That night, I dove into every document Miss Eloise had given me, making notes, cross-referencing names, tracing land deals that stretched back 50 years, and then I found one paragraph, one clause in a dusty file from 1986, a lease addendum signed by Sharon's late husband, granting my family the right to reclaim any and all utility access points running through our land if the HOA violated lease terms. Guess what the HOA office depended on for internet, water, and power? A single utility line running right through the northeast corner of my field. I smiled, stood up, grabbed my old cowboy hat, and switched off the desk lamp. Let's see how they run their meetings without electricity. The next morning, I drove out to the northeast utility post, a padlock in one hand and a wrench in the other. Just as I reached for the main switch powering the HOA office, a black town car pulled up behind me. Out stepped two county inspectors and someone I hadn't seen in over 15 years, a former state senator, walking straight toward me. The sun was just rising, casting long golden streaks across the ranch, but the air was thick with tension. I stood there, wrench in hand, ready to cut the lifeline powering the HOA clubhouse. The car door slammed shut behind me. Matt Cole. I turned slowly. The two inspectors stood back with arms crossed. Official business, no doubt, but the man who approached was wearing a sharp navy suit and glossy black shoes, completely out of place on the dirt trail. Senator Charles Harrove. I hadn't seen him since my late wife's funeral, and even then, he barely spoke. Charles, I said, trying to mask my surprise, didn't expect to see you out here. He didn't smile. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a formal injunction, he said, handing it to me. Filed this morning. Signed by the county judge. I opened it and scanned quickly. Temporary hold on all land use actions including cutting utilities. I stared at the signature. Judge Martha Dillard, Sharon's close ally. It's all starting to make sense, I said, holding the paper like it was poison. You know what this is? Charles nodded. It's politics. He didn't even try to sugarcoat it. I took a step closer. You signing with her now? I'm not signing with anyone, Matt, he said calmly. I'm protecting my investments. The HOA's got donors. They're expanding, and they want Willow Creek to be the next suburban paradise. Your ranch, right in the middle of their plans. I clenched my jaw. So, it's about money. It's always about money, he said. You can fight it if you want, but be smart. Sell the land, take the offer, walk away clean. My heart pounded. I'm not selling my legacy. He adjusted his cufflinks, then turned and got into his car. It drove off, leaving me standing there, wrench heavy in my hand. The inspectors stayed long enough to post a laminated county seal notice on the utility post before following. I was left alone in the dust. The next few days were some of the lowest I've ever known. Reporters called, asking how it felt to be the face of anti-progress. Another ambushed me outside the feed store with a camera crew. I told them they were trespassing. They said Sharon invited them. Then came the mail, fake bills, HOA fines totaling over $6,000, threats to sue for emotional distress, pictures of my chickens tagged as evidence. One morning, I walked outside to find someone had spray-painted Hick Farm across my barn doors. Still, I didn't back down. Miss Eloise and I worked late into the night, gathering every scrap of evidence. We got signed statements from neighbors, pulled zoning maps, and uncovered every shady deal the HOA had ever touched. But I knew paperwork wasn't enough. I needed to unite the community. So, I hosted a block gathering and not one of Sharon's fancy galas with wine glasses and catered hors d'oeuvres. Just pulled pork sandwiches, sweet tea, and hay bales to sit on. I invited everyone, supporters and skeptics alike. To my surprise, they showed up. Mr. Bill brought homemade cornbread. The Hernandez kids played tag in the pasture. Even Sandy from the diner showed up with a peach cobbler and an apology for giving me the cold shoulder that night. I climbed onto an old crate and faced the crowd. The HOA doesn't want to protect this neighborhood, I told them, voice ringing out clear. They want to own it. They want to control it. I'm not fighting them just for myself. I'm fighting for all of us, because if they take my ranch today, your backyard might be next. The crowd erupted in applause. I could feel the tide starting to turn, but Sharon wasn't finished. The very next morning, a sheriff's deputy showed up at my door with a final eviction notice. Not for my house, no. This one was for the parking lot the HOA still hadn't paid rent on. According to the letter, they were claiming squatters' rights. I almost laughed. They wanted to flip the script on me, so I did what I knew would get their attention. I fenced off the entire lot overnight, barbed wire, wooden posts, and a big red sign that read, "Private property and no parking, violators will be towed." Oh boy, did they lose it. The next home meeting was complete chaos. People were forced to park 3 streets away. Sharon showed up in heels and nearly twisted her ankle trying to cross my field. Tom tried to remove the wire and got himself tangled. Julie called the cops again, but this time the sheriff didn't side with them. Sheriff Dale took one look at the documents I handed him and said, "Looks legal to me." That night, Sharon's crew tried a counterattack. I heard the engine's first 2 landscaping trucks pulling into the lot just outside my fence. One had a bulldozer. The plan was clear. Tear down the fence and take the space back by force. But what they didn't know was I'd been recording everything. Every text, every voicemail, every drone flyover, every forged citation. Just before the bulldozer could reach the first post, 2 unmarked SUVs screeched in front of it. County marshals. I'd filed an emergency injunction the day before, backed by my recorded evidence. The driver was ordered out, the trucks were seized, and Sharon, she was served with charges: harassment, property damage, conspiracy, and unlawful use of public resources. She screamed, but I said nothing. I just watched her face as she was handed her court summons. As the marshals packed up the vehicles and neighbors gathered, a man in a beige suit stepped out of a silver car parked quietly nearby. He wore a city official badge and walked straight up to me. "Mr. Cole," he said calmly, "you may have stopped the HOA, but the city is looking to claim this entire area for redevelopment." And just like that, I realized the fight wasn't over. It was only getting bigger. The man in the beige suit was calm, too calm. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and handed me a formal envelope. "Notice of intent to rezone," he said. "This isn't a threat, it's a city initiative. Willow Creek is on the list of high-priority development zones for 2025. We've already had investors from Austin and Dallas scouting for tech hubs, residential estates, maybe even a golf resort. Your ranch happens to sit right in the proposed green belt." I opened the envelope and skimmed through it. There it was, clear as day, a detailed plan to rezone the land from agricultural to mixed-use development, essentially the city's way of saying, sell out or get out. I looked up at him. "This land's been a ranch since 1892, he nodded. "And things change." He gave a polite smile, nodded again, and walked away like it was just another Tuesday and no fanfare, no conscience. I stood frozen. First the hoe, now the city. I wasn't just fighting petty neighbors anymore. I was up against real estate giants, local politics, and corporate money. When I got back inside, Miss Eloise was waiting with stacks of paperwork. She raised an eyebrow. "You look like you saw a ghost." I handed her the envelope. She read it quietly, then slowly placed it on the table and folded her hands. "We're going to war." The following week was a whirlwind of legal filings, community meetings, and late-night phone calls. I started gathering every historical document tied to my land. Turns out, my grandfather had registered part of the ranch as a heritage property decades ago. It wasn't enough to stop development by itself, but it gave us a solid legal foundation to stand on. We also dove deep into city zoning laws. That's when Eloise found a golden thread buried in a 1979 municipal clause. It read, "Any privately owned parcel containing more than 15 acres and operated as an active agricultural entity for over 40 years shall be deemed a protected working land not subject to forestry zoning without a public referendum." That meant the city couldn't legally force me to sell without putting the decision to a public vote. But there was a catch. The city had already started posting misleading notices, telling residents rezoning was a done deal, trying to pressure them into support before the vote even happened. I had to stop them, so I did something bold. I ran for town council. Now, I'm no politician. I wear flannel shirts and mud-caked boots. I speak plain and don't sugarcoat, but I had something the city boys didn't: the truth. With help from Mr. Bill, the Hernandez family, and even Sandy from the diner, we kicked off a grassroots campaign. We printed flyers, held barbecues, organized town halls under the stars right on my land, and we told everyone the same thing. This isn't just about a ranch, it's about saving Willow Creek from being swallowed whole by concrete. Soon, the whispers turned into cheers. People started pulling their support from the hoe. Sharon's power crumbled like stale cornbread. One by one, her board members resigned, but Sharon wasn't going down without a fight. She arranged a televised debate on the local public access channel. I'll admit, she came sharp, a power suit, clipboard loaded with stats and flashy graphics. She went first. "The hoe has boosted property values, reduced crime, made Willow Creek desirable. But we can't let outdated land hold back progress. Mr. Cole's ranch belongs in a museum." Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium in my worn denim jacket, holding up a photo of my late wife planting flowers by our barn. "This land has fed families, raised generations, sheltered veterans and widows. You want progress? Build around us, but don't erase us." The room fell silent, then erupted into applause. By the time I stepped off that stage, I knew I'd won something. Maybe not the election, not yet, but something real. But Sharon still had one last card to play. 2 nights later, just after 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the screech of tires on gravel, a flash of orange, then smoke. I ran outside to see my barn ablaze, flames shooting skyward like a screaming torch. The smell of burning hay and wood filled the air, my animals crying out in panic. I called 911 and grabbed a hose, spraying wherever I could. The fire department arrived fast, but not fast enough. By sunrise, the barn was a blackened skeleton of its former self. Everything was gone: my tools, supplies, even the saddle my father gave me. Neighbors gathered, some offering help, others tears. Sheriff Dale approached quietly. "Matt, I'm sorry," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "This wasn't an accident. There were gas cans behind the barn. Someone had set it on fire, on purpose." "Did you find anything else?" I asked. He handed me a charred piece of plastic, what looked like a corner of an hoe visitor badge. My fist clenched. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was personal, and I was done playing defense. It was time to fight back hard. I stood there, staring at the scorched earth where my barn once stood, my heart pounding, not just with anger, but with something deeper: betrayal. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was history. The place I proposed to my wife, where my boy took his first steps, where generations of Cole's stored feet, saddles, and memories. Now it was ashes, and someone wanted me to break. They underestimated me. Sheriff Dale promised to investigate, But we both knew how it would go. Reports, delays, maybe a name or two whispered behind closed doors, but no real justice, not unless I made it happen myself. So I got to work. First, I called Miss Eloise. She was furious, firing off legal options like bullets. "This is arson, Matt. I don't care who's behind it. This is jail time." "I'm not looking to jail anyone," I said. "I want to end this." And that's when the idea hit me. If they were willing to burn down my barn to make a point, I was going to buy the very ground they stood on to bury theirs. Over the years, I'd saved every penny that didn't go back into the ranch. Not because I was frugal, but because after my wife passed, money didn't mean much anymore. I never remarried, never traveled, just worked, ate, and slept. But now I had purpose. I met with a private real estate agent I trusted, Chuck Reiner, a man who once offered to buy a slice of my backfield for cash. "Chuck," I said, "I need to know who owns the lots behind the Ho clubhouse, those 3 parcels they use for extra storage." He raised a brow. "You want to buy them?" "I want to own everything touching their clubhouse." Quietly, the fight was about to get real. Those lots behind the Ho clubhouse were still privately owned by an older couple who didn't exactly care for Sharon's board. With Chuck's help, I made them offers they couldn't refuse, and they didn't refuse. Within 2 weeks, I owned every parcel of land touching the Ho building. Then I did something no one expected. I built a pop-up feed store and an animal rescue shelter right next to their fence line. It was legal, fully functional, and absolutely infuriating to Sharon. Imagine trying to host an Ho brunch while a rooster crows next door and kids are adopting goats out back every Saturday. I offered free tours, handed out fresh eggs to local families, and hosted build-your-own birdhouse workshops. The community loved it. And guess who I hired? The very neighbors Sharon had fined, bullied, and ignored for years. Tom, her former board member, was now handing out hay bales, laughing like a man reborn. Julie stopped by with her teenage daughter just to volunteer. Bit by bit, Sharon's empire crumbled. But she wasn't done yet. One afternoon, while I was helping a young boy bottle feed a lamb, Chuck called me in a panic. "Matt, you need to see this." He emailed me a scanned document, a petition for emergency eminent domain. The city had filed it. They were trying to seize not just the whole land, but mine too. They claimed my structures were temporary and obstructive, that the area had higher redevelopment value. If approved, they'd have the power to bulldoze everything my work, my family's legacy erased. And the hearing was set for just 7 days later. I felt sick, but I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I mobilized. That week, we organized the largest petition Willow Creek had ever seen, over 2,400 signatures. Local media picked up the story. Rancher vs. HOA. David fights Goliath in Willow Creek showdown. People I didn't even know started showing up. Young couples, veterans, farmers from the next county over. Someone painted a huge mural of my barn with the words, "You can burn the barn, but you can't kill the roots." The mural went viral online. Even a few state representatives chimed in, demanding inquiries into the Ho's tactics and the city's rezoning agenda. By hearing day, the town council chamber was packed wall to wall. Sharon walked in wearing her signature pink suit, flanked by 2 lawyers and Charles Hargrove himself. I showed up with dirt on my boots, a folder full of evidence, and Miss Eloise at my side. The judge was not Martha Dillard. She'd recused herself after complaints of bias. The new judge was younger, sharper, and curious. "What exactly is this property to you, Mr. Cole?" she asked. I stood, holding up a faded photo of my wife beside the barn. "It's my past, my home, and my promise to everyone who's ever loved this land. I'm not here because I hate development. I'm here because some things are worth protecting." The room went silent. Then the judge leaned back and said, "Petition denied." The city lost. The whole lost. Sharon looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Just as she stood to leave, a uniformed officer approached her with a small envelope. "Sharon Blake, you're being investigated for fraud, harassment, and property sabotage." Her eyes widened. I didn't smile. I just tipped my hat. Justice wasn't just about winning, it was about making sure they never tried it again. But as I stepped outside, finally free, finally victorious, a neighbor came rushing toward me, breathless. "Matt, You've got to come quick. It's the rescue barn. What about it? There's a man inside. Says he has a deal for you, offering more money than I've ever seen. I blinked. More money? I walked toward the barn, unsure what I'd find. Standing there by the feed store was a man in a silk shirt and a Rolex, holding a briefcase full of cash. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I represent a group from Silicon Valley. We want to buy your ranch. Name your price." And just like that, it wasn't just the HOA or the city anymore, it was the world. The man in the silk shirt stood calmly by the feed store, like he belonged there, like his shiny shoes weren't caked in mud, or his designer cologne wasn't battling the scent of goats and hay. He smiled. "Let's skip the small talk, Mr. Cole. My clients want this land, all of it, the ranch, the feed store, the old burned barn, even that stretch of sunflower field by the creek." I crossed my arms. "Not for sale." He chuckled lightly and opened the silver briefcase. It was full of neatly stacked bundles of cash, with a printed contract clipped on top. "We'll start at $2.5 million, he said. "That's just the first offer. You'll never have to fix another fence post again." I didn't even flinch. "You think money is enough to take away a man's roots?" His smile tightened. "I think everyone has a price. Even men like you." I turned slowly, motioning toward the pasture beyond the barn where two little girls were feeding baby goats under their mother's watchful eye. "You see them?" I asked. "They've been here every Saturday since we opened." "That little girl with the glasses? She was afraid of animals 2 weeks ago. Now she wants to be a vet." "So," he replied coolly. "So," I said, "this land is doing something. It's healing people, bringing neighbors together. That's worth more than all the tech campuses in the world." He closed the briefcase and gave one last warning. "You're standing in the way of billions. You'll get tired, Mr. Cole." "They always do." Then he walked out, leaving the scent of greed behind him. Later that evening, I sat alone on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee and the contract still in my hand. Miss Eloise called. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, "just thinking." "You're not considering it, are you?" "Number, but I want to know who's behind it." She was already ahead of me. "It's a conglomerate called Westridge Holdings. They're buying up rural properties across the country, disguised under shell corporations. They don't care about your history. They only care about flipping farmland into smart communities and selling condos to billionaires from Silicon Valley. Then we fight," I said. She sighed. "Matt, they don't play fair. You've already burned their first messenger. They'll come back with lawyers, loopholes, zoning tricks, everything they've got." "Let them," I replied. And they did. The next week was a relentless storm of legal maneuvers. The town was flooded with slick flyers promising future-forward living, complete with artificial lakes, community gyms, and rooftop cafes. They even offered buyout bonuses to homeowners in Willow Creek to support the rezoning. Sharon, freshly disgraced and quiet for a while, suddenly re-emerged, now backed by new allies. She started showing up at home meetings again, rebranded as a community consultant for Westridge Holdings. Her job? Persuade locals that I was standing in the way of their future. She handed out gift baskets, organized free yoga classes, even hosted vision board nights where people could paste pictures of dream homes on posters and talk about how amazing Willow Creek could become. And it worked. Some neighbors started wavering. "Maybe it's time to move forward," one said. "Matt, you're stuck in the past," another whispered. I felt like I was losing them, until the incident at the creek. It was a Friday morning when I found the damage. The old wooden bridge crossing my sunflower field had been sawed halfway through, nails pulled, planks cracked. If a child had stepped on it, they'd have fallen straight into the ravine below. I called the sheriff immediately. "Looks like sabotage," Dale muttered. But this time, we had more than guesses. Just a mile down the road, Deputy Evans had pulled over an abandoned U-Haul van behind the Baptist church. Inside were construction tools and a backpack embroidered with Sharon Blake's initials. That was the final push. I called an emergency town meeting. The church hall was packed, some curious, some defensive, some just wanting answers. I stepped to the front, held up 2 photos, one of the burned barn, the other of the broken bridge, and said, "Every time we say no to outsiders, they don't back off. They attack first. They tried to buy me out. Then they tried to scare me out. Now, They're putting your kids at risk just to force a vision that doesn't belong here. I pointed to a little girl in the front row at the same girl from the goat pen. If that bridge had collapsed, she could have been hurt, a broken bar or worse. All for what? Rooftop cafes, fiber optic dreams? The room fell silent. Then, one by one, people began standing up, saying no and no to the buyouts, no to Sharon, no to corporate takeovers. By the end of the night, we had a community pledge, over 500 signatures, vowing to preserve Willow Creek's identity and oppose all rezoning until a full public vote. Miss Eloise filed it with the county the next day. It was official. Westridge would need 80% approval to push any development forward, and they were nowhere near the number. But Sharon wasn't done scheming. The very next morning, I received a certified letter as summons for a new lawsuit. They claimed I had fraudulently purchased the land adjacent to the HOA clubhouse, that I misled the previous owners into selling. They demanded every title I held be revoked. If they won, I'd lose not just the feed store, I'd lose every parcel of land I used to block them. The court date was set for 2 weeks later, at the exact day my wife and I would have celebrated our 30th anniversary. That night, I looked out across the field, the wind brushing through the tall grass, and whispered, "I'm not backing down, honey, not now, not ever." But deep inside, I feared this time a broken bar they might actually win. The days leading up to the hearing felt like walking through fog, a heavy weight on my chest. I barely slept. My appetite vanished. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my wife's smile, my burned barn, and that cold smirk on Sharon's face. But I wasn't alone anymore. Willow Creek had rallied. Every day, someone stopped by the ranch, dropping off cookies, offering prayers, or just saying, "We're with you, Matt." The feed store stayed busy. Volunteers helped rebuild the barn frame with salvaged wood. Kids played in the field like it was their own backyard. It gave me hope, but I knew one misstep in court could cost me everything. 2 nights before the hearing, Miss Eloise called me late. "Matt, I need you to come over." I drove over fast, boots still muddy, heart pounding. She opened the door with a rare smile. "I found something," she said, handing me a dusty manila envelope from her old filing cabinet. Inside was a handwritten letter. Inside the envelope was a letter from none other than Sharon's husband, God rest his soul. It was addressed to my father and dated 1989. In the letter, he personally acknowledged the family's full rights to the adjacent parcels and renounced any future claims by the HOA. Written in his own hand, signed, witnessed, and notarized. I stared at it, stunned. "Why didn't we find this sooner?" I asked. Eloise grinned. "Because I had it filed under personal correspondence and forgot all about it." But guess what? Personal letters become legal evidence if notarized, and this one is airtight. It was our silver bullet. That night, I finally slept. The next morning, the courthouse lobby buzzed like a beehive. Reporters lined the steps. Local news vans parked across the street. It had become the most talked about land case in our county's history. Sharon arrived first, dressed in sleek gray, chin held high, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys from Westridge Holdings. Charles Harrow followed close behind, pretending not to know her, but clearly part of the scheme. Then I walked in, old boots, tucked-in shirt, sleeves rolled up, Miss Eloise at my side, in her signature turquoise suit, files tucked under both arms. The judge, same one as before, wasted no time. The Westridge lawyer went first, launching into a well-rehearsed speech about fraudulent land transfers, abuse of elderly sellers, and exploitation of property law. They claimed I coerced the owners of the adjacent lots, that I used emotional manipulation, that I pretended to buy for agricultural purposes only to disrupt the HOA. I kept my mouth shut. Then the judge turned to our side. Eloise stood calm, composed. Slowly, she walked to the evidence table and laid down the handwritten letter. "Your Honor," she said, "this isn't just a letter, it's a legal document, signed and notarized by the HOA president at the time, Sharon Blake's own husband, acknowledging the parcels in question do not and never did belong to the HOA." She let the silence hang, then added, "Furthermore, we have purchase contracts, audio recordings from the sellers confirming they sold willingly, and city maps showing the HOA has no jurisdiction over those plots." The judge took a long moment reading through everything. Finally, he looked up, The court finds no evidence of fraud. In fact, it finds this lawsuit frivolous and retaliatory. He turned to Sharon's lawyers. Case dismissed. And unless your clients want sanctions, I suggest you stop wasting this court's time. The gavel hit wood. It was over. I had won. The courthouse steps felt like a victory parade. Neighbors cheered. Reporters swarmed. Someone handed me a bouquet of sunflowers, the same ones that once grew by the creek. But as the celebration swirled around me, I saw Sharon standing off to the side, alone. Her suit was perfect, her posture proud, but her eyes were empty. She stared at me with a mix of disbelief and quiet rage. Then she walked down the steps, pushed through the crowd, and disappeared. I never saw her again. Rumors say she moved to Houston. Others say she filed for bankruptcy after Westridge cut her loose. Honestly, I didn't care. She had spent years trying to erase me, but in the end, it was her who faded away. A year later, the ranch was fully restored. The barn stood taller than ever, painted bright red with white trim, and a small wooden plaque near the door that read, "For Ellie, always." The feed store became a permanent co-op managed by locals. We raised enough money to build a learning center where school kids could come interact with the animals. The sunflower field bloomed again, thicker, brighter, taller than ever. People came from all over Texas just to see it. One afternoon, as I walked the edge of the field with Sheriff Dale, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You know what the town calls this place now?" he asked. I raised a brow. "The heart of Willow Creek," he said. I smiled. "Not bad for a stubborn old rancher, huh?" I tell this story now, not to brag, not to gloat, but to remind you of something. No matter how much money they throw at you, no matter how big their buildings or loud their voices, no matter how hard they try to bury you out, you don't bow, you stand. You protect what matters, because when your roots run deep enough, even fire can't burn you down. Now, tell me, where are you watching from? And would you have stood your ground too?